Vore-O-Sensei by Xander Martin, 98. Another day, another ridiculously enormous heap of shenanigans in Class 3E, also known as Vore-O-Sensei's old campus building. Not to mention who even knows how many effortlessly foiled Vore-O-Sensei assassination attempts by me and my classmates. Nagisa rather predictably began internally monologuing to himself as the incredibly run-down miniature school in which he and his fellow E-classmates worked under Vore-O-Sensei's partially academic tutelage was displayed in an entirely too familiar midday establishing shot. Now you're probably already wondering exactly how this day is going to be different from all the other ones that we've spent with Vore-O-Sensei, but let me tell you, pal, the answer to that question is not going to be a pretty one. Nagisa, internally chuckling and increasingly nervously, continued internally monologuing to himself as Vore-O-Sensei rather frightenedly and very pale-lookingly called out for him and Karma from the teaching desk at the front of the classroom, causing both of them and their fellow Class 3E students to loudly gasp in response. Nagisa. Karma. The utterly pathetic crying and sobbing Vore-O-Sensei got down onto his remarkably numerous knees and rather weakly began asking Nagisa and Karma, being downright hilariously overdramatic in the process, as said pair of students rather embarrassingly approached him. "Oh, for crying out loud, snap out of it, you freaking fool," Karma very frustratedly yelled at Vore-O-Sensei, attempting to fiercely slap said grotesquely weird and cartoonish-looking octopus man teacher thing right across the face with his left hand, and causing Nagisa to rather startledly flinch in response as he did so. Surely enough, however, Vore-O-Sensei reflexively used his Mach 20 speed to teleport himself quite literally all the way around the classroom, and therefore effortlessly dodging said face-slapping attempt, causing Karma to exasperatedly sigh in response. "Well, you see, I would if I could, but first, I'm afraid that you two are going to have to get the virus that is currently affecting me out of me." Vore-O-Sensei suddenly sprung straight back onto his tentacle feet and ever so eagerly began explaining to Nagisa and Karma, causing the two of them to rather awkwardly and squeamishly ask how. In response, while both of their faces briefly but very rapidly began turning green from the mere thought of what Vore-O-Sensei was almost certainly going to make the two of them do. "How, you ask? Why, by venturing into my body with the help of a certain pair of virtually indestructible protective suits whose pant pockets are inexplicably able to hold seemingly infinite amounts of stuff. Of course, it'll be a delightfully educational experience. Trust me," Vore-O-Sensei rather smugly explained to Nagisa and Karma, patting both of their increasingly disgusted-looking heads with his tentacle hands as he did so. Hold that thought for 1 second. Teach, there's something we need to do, real quick," Karma nauseatedly groaned and then very hastily explained to Vore-O-Sensei, while Nagisa, equally nauseated, nodded his increasingly light-feeling head in response. "Here, go ahead and take your aforementioned nanosuits, or whatever in the hell I'm supposed to call them, with you so that you two can change into them yourselves," Vore-O-Sensei urgently encouraged Nagisa and Karma as he inhumanly speedily pulled said suits out from the drawers of his desk and just as speedily handed them to their intended new wearers. "Okay." "Thanks, teacher," Nagisa rather embarrassedly thanked Vore-O-Sensei as he and Nagisa frantically ran out of the classroom and into the nearest bathroom for some good old-fashioned vomiting and, of course, painfully blatant fan service. one impressively large amount of vomiting, and one intensely homoerotic on-screen display of Nagisa and Karma's naked bodies later. Alright, we're back and all suited up. What now? Karma incredibly charismatically asked Koro-sensei as he and Nagisa returned to their designated classroom with rather disturbingly skin-tight astronaut suits, complete with helmets whose visors allowed a rather surprisingly a large amount of sound to pass through themselves, along with mechanical wings that gave their wearers the power of flight on their bodies and a truly admirable amount of courage in their hearts. And, what exactly happened to all of our classmates? Pardon me asking, to be more precise. Where did they go? Nagisa shrugged his shoulders and somewhat worriedly asked Koro-sensei, sincerely hoping that Koro-sensei hadn't sent them all into his body as he did so. Into my belly! Koro-sensei intimidatingly roared at Nagisa and Karma, wildly feeling his tentacles all over the place as he did so. Naturally enough, said boys both jumped straight up into the air and downright horrifically screamed, "Oh my god, he's really a fucking monster!" in response. "Oh, relax. I'm just killing you silly little dorks." Koro-sensei clutched his clearly aching belly with his arms and teasingly explained to Nagisa and Karma while uproariously laughing as he did so. Needless to say, said both boys were clearly not amused, and Koro-sensei also clearly wasn't going to be able to hide how utterly awful of a belly ache he had for much longer, if any longer. Haha, very funny. Nagisa and Karma rolled their eyes and sarcastically thought to themselves as Koro-sensei suddenly began tightly clutching his increasingly aching belly and loudly crying in agony. "I sent them all to the forest for a nice and peaceful nature studying expedition with Mr. Karasuma," loudly cries while curled up in the sideways fetal position on the floor. "I just couldn't bring myself to make them watch me go through all of this utterly horrific pain that your upcoming journey through my inside is almost definitely going to end up causing me to heal." Koro-sensei hysterically screamed while bawling his ever-loving head off in the process. Amusingly enough, Nagisa and Karma just blankly stared at him in response, not even quite knowing how to react to his utter ridiculousness anymore. Anyways, with that being said, please discard any anti-me weapons that you two of you, especially you, Karma, may or may not be hiding in those lovely new pant pockets of yours, and please do so immediately. Koro-sensei, after screwing his head back onto himself and getting back up onto his feet, immediately swung straight back into his normal mood, due to the fact that the virus inside him was no longer directly attacking his stomach, and sternly yet politely commanded Nagisa and Karma, who somewhat reluctantly followed his orders in response. Surely enough, Karma's suit pockets contained a lot more anti-Koro-sensei weapons when compared to Nagisa's. Quite a few ludicrously easily dodged and foiled surprise attacking Koro-sensei with the anti-Koro-sensei weapons in their pockets attempts by Nagisa and Karma later. Okay, now, at long last, the two of you are finally ready to hopefully non-lethally enter my body. Koro-sensei triumphantly laughed as he took the formerly empty, not to mention cartoonishly bigger on the inside, portable cooler that Nagisa and Karma had just stuffed with all of their concealed anti-Koro-sensei weapons, and then extremely forcefully threw it out the classroom through the nearest window. Hold on, Teach. There's still one more place in which you apparently forgot to look. My stomach. Karma quite snidely teased Koro-sensei, reaching into his mouth with his hands and then repeatedly poking his vulva with his fingers as he did so, until finally, sure enough, he vomited yet again, puking one last spare anti-Koro-sensei knife directly into his hands in the process. "Oh, believe me, I beg to differ," Vore-O-Sensei mockingly teased Karma, briefly converting his eyeballs into the X-ray virgin mode in the process as he, with his usual utterly ludicrous speed, seemingly inexplicably, unsurprisingly dodged said boy's attempt to stab him with his stomach knife, before then immediately whipping said knife out of said boy's hand with one arm. "Damn it, I've been foiled again by my own freaking teacher," Karma frustratedly yelled as he reluctantly complied with Vore-O-Sensei's rather understandably extremely strict "remove the anti-Vore-O-Sensei weapons from all of your pockets" order, by also quite forcefully throwing his aforementioned stomach knife out of the classroom through the exact same gaping and jagged window hole that Vore-O-Sensei had just made for literally no apparent reason other than because he thought that doing so would make him look cool. "Oh, don't worry, Karma. I'm sure that he's a lot more vulnerable on the inside than he is the outside," Nagisa rather optimistically reminded Karma as the two of them reluctantly stood in front of Vore-O-Sensei's increasingly anxiously waited for said octopus man to fire the magical shrink rays at them with his hands. "Oh yeah, especially when it comes to his precious little heart and that big squishy brain. Oh mama." Karma began drooling sadistically, moaning to herself, gaining a quite visibly large erection and remarkably intensely creeping Nagisa and Vore-O-Sensei out as he did so. "Just for the record, Karma, killing me from the inside while I am completely unable to defend myself will be considered such an immensely cowardly and despicable act that if the people who are watching over this dainty little assassination game of ours somehow manage to find out that you and or Nagisa have done it, they might actually end up classifying it as plain old utterly sadistic murder, rather than something that actually deserves to be called a proper assassination. Believe me, you and your partner have been warned," Vore-O-Sensei coldly yet admirably informatively explained to Karma, while said boy and Nagisa both regretfully nodded their heads in agreement. "Oh, and by the way, Karma, taking control of my brain and then using it to make me kill myself is hardly any less cowardly and despicable of a killing me method than directly attacking my internal organs. And despite probably not actually being considered prison-worthy by our local government and said government's law enforcers, it still could potentially result in you and or Nagisa's not actually getting the proper amount of reward money that people who kill criminals that are as utterly infamous as I am are supposed to receive. So please take note of that as well. You too, Nagisa," Vore-O-Sensei continued explaining to Karma and Nagisa. In an amazingly calm and anger-lacking vocal tone, while said boys meekly hung their head in shame at the mere thought of making said octopus man commit mind control-induced suicide. More importantly, however, please remember to have fun and stay safe while you explore the wonderfully fascinating interior of my body. Also, don't forget to take note of my inner weaknesses," Vore-O-Sensei ever so lovingly encouraged Nagisa and Karma, ecstatically, not to mention completely unchangeably, grinning from ear to ear and impressively and gently patting their shoulders with his hands as he did so. "Now, before I shrink you boys, is there anything else that you may or may not need to know? If so, please remember that this is quite literally your last chance to tell me," Vore-O-Sensei quite curiously asked Nagisa and Karma, while said boys rather meekly scratched the backs of their heads and said, "Well, we guess that we should probably transfer the remaining contents of our backpack and whatnot into our suit pockets." To him, with happy but embarrassed lookingly closed eyes in response. "Ugh, fine," Vore-O-Sensei rather impatiently groaned as Nagisa and Karma rather hastily emptied out the remaining contents of their backpacks. Wait! I almost forgot to give the two of you your most important tools of all. Kodo-sensei ever so suddenly had a completely out of nowhere eureka moment, and ever so flamboyantly explained while pointing this index finger straight up into the air. While I might not be allowing the two of you to use anti-me weapons during this mission, you are definitely going to be needing antivirus weapons, which is exactly where these babies come into play, Kodo-sensei incredibly enthusiastically explained to Nagisa and Karma as he reached into his desk, pulled out a pair of metal-bladed and impossibly durable injector knives from its drawers, and then very eagerly handed said knives to said boys, still immensely cartoonishly grinning from ear to ear as he did so. "Wow, what are these?" Nagisa fascinatingly asked Kodo-sensei. "What do you freaking think they are, dumbass?" Karma rather carelessly threw his arms out beside himself, with his new injector knife being thankfully tightly confined in the grip of his right hands as he did so, and increasingly frustratingly pointed out to Nagisa, while Kodo-sensei agreeing noddedly his head in response. Needless to say, Nagisa felt like quite an idiot indeed. Indeed, these are injector knives that have been thoroughly loaded with a liquid medicinal substance that is almost guaranteed to very thoroughly kill the virus that has been afflicting me, Kodo-sensei impressively patiently explained to Nagisa, ironically giving both Karma and said boy the perfect material for several more questions, as they both rather hastily stuffed their new injector knives into their suit pockets in response. "Hey, wait a minute. What do you mean by almost, you freaking idiot? You seriously don't even know whether or not this goofy and tropey as all hell, sending me and Nagisa into your body in order to eliminate the virus within it plan of yours isn't actually going to freaking work?" Karma increasingly disbelievingly ranted at Kodo-sensei, while Nagisa's soul piercingly glared at said octopus man in response. "Yeah, exactly what he said. Oh, and also, you haven't even freaking named whatever in the actual hell this so-called virus that you're talking about is. How exactly are we supposed to know that you aren't just pulling our legs and severely overreacting to a slightly above average case of a completely average disease that can be easily cured using also completely average methods? Nagisa rather girlishly placing his hands onto his hips and remarkably sassily began chastising Kodo-sensei, causing said octopus man to rather nervously and embarrassingly drum his hands together and go, in response. Even more importantly, what in God's name is this type of episode plot doing in freaking Eastern animation? Karma downright infuriatingly, not to mention T-Rex-facedly, roared at Kodo-sensei, causing said octopus man to exhaustedly shrug his shoulder and mutter, "Hell if I know," to himself in response. "Alright, for the love of God, enough of this," Kodo-sensei immensely frustratingly yelled at Nagisa and Karma, crossing his arms over his chest and then very dramatically swinging them out besides himself as he did so. Needless to say, both of said boys immediately and surprisingly immediately followed his shut up and listen order in response. "Look, the virus that has been afflicting me, as far as me and my fellow scientists can tell, is an extremely rare and supernaturally powerful form of a certain germ known as COVID-19, or the coronavirus. I quite frankly seem to have downright miraculously caught it from some utterly random person in China, as well, Karma, for the fact that I've been spending far too much free time in said country, and also doing far too much incredibly mean impersonations of its people in the process lately," Kodo-sensei quite regretfully explained to Nagisa and Karma, hanging his head in shame as he did so. "Well, isn't that just utterly predictable?" Karma shrugged his shoulders and smugly sighed, also utterly predictably having a rather remarkably shit-eating grin on his face as he did so. Needless to say, Nagisa was actually quite amused by said joke, but Kodo-sensei was definitely not. "Shut up!" Kodo-sensei fiercely yelled at Karma, nearly punching him in the process. Anyway, the normal function of said disease is mostly just to utterly destroy people's lungs, but this version of it apparently considers such a modest goal to be utterly beneath it. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it even went into my brain this morning just to tell me about how much it wants to be horribly infecting and polluting my entire body, so that said body can become an ideal one for its completely turn into its own, using said brain manually controlling interface. Seriously, you guys need to fucking help me right freaking now. How I really don't want to die. Kodo-sensei returned to his normal standing up straight position and increasingly frighteningly explained to Nagisa and Karma, quickly beginning to increasingly clutch his quite rapidly sanity-losing head with his hands as he did so, before then utterly collapsing onto his hands and knees and breaking down into yet another positively manic fit of crying, screaming, and begging while Nagisa and Karma just extremely embarrassingly and also confusingly stared at him in response. Again with the pretty sure and completely over-dramatic tantrum throwing, Karma's very disappointingly groaned, while he and Nagisa both exasperatedly and head-hangingly face-palmed themselves. Also, isn't, kind of the whole freaking point of you being our current teacher supposed to be the fact that we're trying to find a way to kill you? Honestly, give us one genuinely good reason why we can't just let this so-called coronavirus of yours kill you for us. Nagisa crossed his arms over his chest, repeatedly tapped his right foot against the floor of the classroom, and rather impatiently pointed out to Kodo-sensei while Karma remarkably smirked in agreement. Okay, here's the thing. First of all, it's more or less safe for us to assume that this version of COVID-19 merely wants to conquer and extremely excessively pollute my body rather than actually destroying it. Kodo-sensei got back up onto his feet and surprisingly calmly began explaining, while Nagisa and Karma rather nervously thought, wait for it, to themselves in response. And second of all, the only thing that two of you should be letting some stupid freaking germ kill me for would to prove about you is that you are both utterly spineless freaking cowards. Right now, I am not your target. The virus inside of me is your target. Get that through your thick skulls for the love of Christ. Kodo-sensei unbelievably furiously roared at Nagisa and Karma, briefly but extremely terrifyingly becoming black demon-faced and quite nearly blowing the hair right off of said utterly fear-frozen boys as he did so. Oh, and also, be sure to stuff some extra injector knives into your pockets, just in case the amount of medicine that is being stored within your main injector knives turns out to not actually be enough to take this virus down, you silly gooses. Kodo-sensei suddenly swung straight from his anger incarnate mood into his happy and playful one, and then ratherly teasingly told Nagisa and Karma, who both rather loudly went phew in response, as he reached back into his desk and pulled out numerous additional injector knives for said boys to stuff into their set suit pockets. Say, speaking of this so-called plan of yours, not really making any actual sense whatever, why can't we just kill the virus within you by stabbing you with these medical injector knives of yours, since they're apparently so incredibly ineffective against you? Nagisa philosophically placed his right hand onto his chin and somewhat amusedly pointed out to Kodo-sensei, while Karma agreeing and rather irritatedly muttered exactly to himself in response. Because that just quite simply won't work, okay? As a general assassination classroom logic rule, pretty much any virus that is even nearly as powerful as this one seems to be needs to be directly hit and medicine filled by injection needles such as the extremely glorified ones that I've just given the two of you before. It will actually die rather than just pretending to do so. Kodo-sensei shrugged his shoulders and rather tiredly explained to Nagisa and Karma, who both just blank-facedly stared at him in response. What the hell? As long as this mission allows me to blatantly sadistically kill something, I'm more than ready to participate in it. Karma shrugged his own shoulders and blatantly sadistically chuckled while Nagisa somewhat annoyingly rolled his eyes and muttered, "Of course you are," in response. "Well then, I surely as hell hope that you and Nagisa don't mind quite literally getting eaten alive by me," Kodo-sensei chucklingly teased Nagisa and Karma as he fired exactly 2 magical shrink rays from his hands and rather predictably hit both of said boys with them, causing said boys to shrink to basically microscopic size. Oh, and one last thing. These lovely new suits of yours feature wireless communication links to my brain and its auditory cortex, so I will be able to hear whatever the 2 of you end up saying while you're inside me. Please try not to say anything naughty, okay?" Kodo-sensei wagged one of his right index fingers at Nagisa and Karma and very teasingly informed/warned the 2 of them as he scooped them up with one of his left hands and then very intently held them in front of his face, still standing up remarkably straight despite the immense internal pain that he was presumably experiencing as he did so. "Okay, teach," Nagisa and Karma quite literally groaned as Kodo-sensei rather wildly opened his mouth and then somewhat carelessly tossed not 1 but 2 of his most amazingly talented little assassins straight into it, and therefore straight down his throat. Kodo-sensei rather nervously said out loud, as Nagisa and Karma rapidly yet surprisingly nonchalantly fell straight down its remarkable slimy gullet, dully noting how shockingly human-looking said gullet and the voice box within it were both as they did so. "Wow, Teach, I didn't know that you were literally so human on the inside," Karma jokingly laughed as he and Nagisa finally reached Kodo-sensei's immensely junk food-loaded and aching stomach, which they were thoroughly and amazingly calmly observing, the rather weirdly normal-looking, except for being red and swollen and being populated by numerous anthropomorphic, bat-winged, and extremely Chinese-looking COVID-19 germs that were quite busily flying around in it and dumping all sorts of trash, including oral canisters and their own urine and feces into it, interior of by hovering directly over its digestive acid using the aforementioned mechanical wings of their suits. Well, it's kind of a long story to say the least. Kodo-sensei nervously scratched the back of his head with his hands and very regretfully told Karma, while said boy and Nagisa very confusedly looked at each other in response. "Well, whatever the reason for it may be, you sure do seem to have an internal anatomy type that the type of virus that you're supposedly dealing with right now knows its way around awfully well." Nagisa crossed his arms over his chest and rather snarkily reminded Kodo-sensei, while said octopus man crossed his own arms over his chest and quite stubbornly muttered, in response. "Hey, I can turn my body into whatever I freaking want to turn it into, okay? The reasons why I somewhat recently decided to convert my internal organs into nearly exact replicas of human ones is none of your freaking business, now is it?" Kodo-sensei placed his hands onto his hips and extremely sassily reminded Nagisa as said boy and Karma rather disgustingly looked around at the absolute massive piles of instant noodles, candies, and snacks that the said octopus man's stomach acid was filled with. "Well, whether it is or isn't our business, you surely as hell do need to freaking eat better, Teach. For crying out loud, I'm seeing freaking Lunchables packages that contain healthier food than this crap." Karma mockingly laughed at Kodo-sensei as he and Nagisa looked and flew around the inside of the octopus man's thoroughly inflamed stomach and saw all of the absolute garbage that he and an increasingly large number of clones of Korona-chan had been filling it with. "Hey, that's none of your business either, you freaking jerk." Kodo-sensei wildly flailed his arms all over the place and fiercely yelled at Karma, causing jets of steam to rapidly shoot themselves out of said utterly red-faced octopus man's ear holes as he did so. Also, you probably won't even be able to actually see any food being digested in my stomach under normal circumstances, due to how downright inhumanly fast my digestive system is supposed to be. But this new coronavirus of mine seems to have somehow found a way to hack into the said now human-like digestive system of mine, and therefore reduce its efficiency to that of being an actual normal humans, while also using my brain to mind control me into starting yet another one of my typical junk food binge eating sessions, strongly suggesting that it rather typically has the ability to clone itself. Vore-O-Sensei drummed his hands together and reluctantly explained, while Nagisa and Karma began to look surprisingly frightened in response. No need to fear, Teach, because I've gotten just the cure for that. Karma downright evilly laughed as he suddenly reached into his suit pockets and then pulled out a positively huge and explicitly skull and crossbones labeled bag of ghost pepper seasoning and laxative powder from said pockets, extremely obviously planning to pour quite literally all of the contents of said bag into Vore-O-Sensei's stomach acid as he did so. Needless to say, said octopus man was already also quite literally too frightened to even be able to speak. Wait, Karma, do you really need to be this pointlessly cruel to Vore-O-Sensei? Can't we just, use normal laxatives for this type of purpose? Nagisa tightly grabbed Karma by the shoulders and then lovingly kissed him. Increasingly worriedly and frustratingly asked said utter lunatic while Vore-O-Sensei tightly clenched his belly and his hands in exhausted groan of pain. My laxatives are far more effective anyways. Karma sadistically laughed, causing Nagisa to tightly cover his mouth with both of his hands and loudly yell, "No!" in response as he forcefully ripped his aforementioned death bag open and then ever so carelessly poured quite literally every last bit of its contents directly into Vore-O-Sensei's stomach acid, causing said acid to very intensely boil and slosh around as a result. Oh, sweet Christ! The pain is absolutely unbearable! Mayday! Mayday! Vore-O-Sensei writhingly and cryingly shrieked in utter agony, immediately teleporting himself straight into the nearest forest for a good old-fashioned diarrhea dump as he did so. Man, I sure hope that none of my other current students see me doing this. Vore-O-Sensei humiliatingly groaned as he thoroughly exposed his new buttocks and then rather hastily readied himself to extremely explosively defecate into an otherwise clean and extremely natural pool of water. Meanwhile, the instantly but artificially and only partially digested trash that had formerly been residing in his stomach was already inhumanly rapidly making its way through his intestines as we spoke. Ooh, this is so much fun. Many of the Corona-chan clones that had previously been mucking about in Vore-O-Sensei's stomach gleefully and nothing but bikini-wearingly laughed as they incredibly foolishly used said octopus man's aforementioned intestines as a giant water slide, with his small intestine being an especially wild ride for them as they did so. Gah! Vore-O-Sensei screamed so loudly that said scream ended up echoing around quite literally the entire forest that he was in. Wow, what was with all that utterly dreadful noise that Vore-O-Sensei presumably just made? Nagisa and Karma's fellow classmates rather curiously thought to themselves as they very slowly and very cautiously approached the pool of water that said octopus man had just incredibly mightily pooped into. Aye! Nagisa and Karma's fellow classmates horrifically shrieked in disgust as they saw how completely brown and toxic looking the water in said pool had been, made by Vore-O-Sensei's recent defecation into it. Needless to say, even Mr. Katasuma himself looked downright horrified. For the love of Christ, you two, would it seriously have killed you two to clean out my digestive system in a at least slightly less painful and humiliating way? Kodo-sensei fiercely, increasingly lightheadedly scolded Nagisa and Karma as he used the abnormally huge stash of tissues in his desk drawers to wipe the poop stains out of his butt, while said boys alarmingly rapidly flew their way up into his liver, in which, surely enough, the members of a rather disturbingly large amount of Korona-chan clones were merely and completely nakedly bathing in the surprisingly soothingly boiling and hot tub-esque pool of blood within the liver. While immensely gratuitously showing off their rather impressive bulbous tits and their mouth-watering gorgeous black toenailed feet in the process. Well, no. Nagisa shrugged his shoulders and rather embarrassedly sighed, clearly not wanting to admit how much of the bodies of Korona-chan's asexually self-produced clones were turning him on, or how Karma's personality was turning him on for that matter, as he and Karma intently hovered directly above the aforementioned makeshift swimming pool in Kodo-sensei's liver. You know what? Maybe we should have a grand old time with these sexy Chinese viruses, if you know what I mean, Karma droolingly and extremely arousedly suggested to Nagisa, teasingly nudging said boy with his right elbow and acquiring yet another remarkably large stifle as he did so, as the two of them continued to intently hover directly above the aforementioned makeshift swimming pool in Kodo-sensei's liver. Screw that, you frickin' perv. It's flamethrowing time. Nagisa shockingly maniacally laughed as he suddenly yanked out a downright freakishly large flamethrower from one of his suit pockets, and then immediately began using it nearly instantly cook the alcohol out of Kodo-sensei's liver blood, while the Korona-chan clones that had formerly been bathing in said liver blood also immediately ran and flew away screaming in response. Wow, and apparently I'm supposed to be the psychopath here, Karma rather worriedly thought to himself as Nagisa impossibly easily shoved his flamethrower straight back into his suit pockets, before then surprisingly confidently crossing his arms over his chest and rather arrogantly smirking in a way that clearly reminded Karma of himself far too much for comfort. For crying out loud, you two, how many freaking times am I going to tell you to be careful in there? Oh, and as for you, Karma, do not even think about engaging in anything related to sexual intercourse with these viruses and or any of the copies of itself. You ought to know by now that I can hear your thoughts just as clearly as spoken words, mister. Kodo-sensei placed his hand onto his hips, regretfully shook his head back and forth, and rather angrily and disgustingly lectured Nagisa, and especially Karma, as the two of them eye-rollingly and groaningly flew their way up into the left, one of his rather unsurprisingly huge and spacious lungs, in which they finally met the Korona-chan, along with quite a few of her almost equally annoying lackeys. Greetings, my filthy friends. Tell me, how long has life been treating the two of you lately? Because to be quite frank with you, I've never felt more alive. The regally dressed and immensely Asian-looking Korona-chan incredibly smugly laughed at Nagisa and Karma's expenses in a rather cartoonishly thick accent, as she and a rather frighteningly large number of her almost equally annoying clones of herself lazily yet seductively sat atop Kodo-sensei's quite literal respiratory branches and high-heeling, dangling, crossed their also dangling legs, while also smoking a disgustingly large number of cigarettes, just for the purely sadistic pleasure that utterly ruining Kodo-sensei's body from the inside was clearly giving them. Meanwhile, needless to say, Kodo-sensei had already almost completely lost his ability to hide how increasingly bad of shape his lungs were in, and very loudly coughing and wheezing as an adult. Hey, smoking's bad for you. You really shouldn't do that, you know. Nagisa placed his hands onto his hips and extremely preachily scolded Korona-chan, comically failing to realize that what her actual reason for doing so in Kodo-sensei's lungs clearly was in process as he and Karma hovered directly in front of said weirdly sexy virus woman hybrid, while thankfully having their own respiratory systems protected by any other barely effective enough combination of their helmets, visors, and the air filtration function of the suits that said helmets belonged to as they did so. Okay, two things. Firstly, smoking is actually very good for you. Type of utterly disgusting creature am I. Secondly, me and my crones are doing it so the man's lungs because it damages them, fool. Corona-chan's increasingly large frustratingly pointed out to Nagisa, while Karma very briefly, but very hatefully glared at said boy and very irritatedly thought, "Yeah, you freaking idiot," to himself in response. "Gah! I'll freaking kill you for what you've been doing to our teacher, you freaking sadistic whore," Nagisa fiercely screamed at Corona-chan, pulling out an injector knife from his suit pockets and then far too eagerly readying himself to charge straight at her with said knife as he did so. Luckily, however, Karma stuck his left arm straight out besides himself and used it to block Nagisa's way just in time to prevent him from actually performing said change. My, how adorably courageous of you. I suppose that you wouldn't mind getting him incredibly graphically killed from within by some razor-sharp and anti-Kodo-sensei DNA-infused fingernails that both me and quite literally every single one of my Kodo-sensei dwelling clones of myself have said in that process, would you? Corona-chan's insufferably snidely and mockingly laughed at Nagisa's expense, causing both him and Karma to rather understandably shrink the pupils of their eyes to comically small sizes and utterly freeze in response to the Chinese accented virus. Yeah, we would, actually. Nagisa and Karma, extremely terrifyingly and intensely trembling, stammered as Corona-chan and her formerly lung-dwelling cohorts laughingly discarded their cigarette butts onto the increasingly weathered and gross-looking floor of Kodo-sensei's left lung, so that they could then proceed to fly straight back out of said octopus man's and then presumably fly straight up into his immensely powerful, yet almost completely defenseless brain for their grand finale. Alright, Karma. Go ahead and clean Kodo-sensei's right lung, and I'll clean this one, Nagisa, surprisingly brave, commanded Karma as the two of them each pulled out exactly one blatant rip-off of the pontoon packs from the Ghostbusters franchise from their suit pockets, before then immediately strapping said packs onto their backs, and using the guns that were attached to said packs to spray absolutely massive amounts of air fresheners into Kodo-sensei's lungs, which rather surprisingly ended up healing said lungs rather than utterly destroying them. What a truly irresistible breath of fresh air this method of teaching Nagisa and Karma about human anatomy is. Kodo-sensei incredibly cornily joked as said boys understandably hastily stuffed their air freshener packs back into their suit pockets, before then tightly zipping said pockets shut and taking a brief and surprisingly possible detour into said octopus's man's amazingly big and increasingly rapidly beating heart, which surely enough, several more of Corona-chan's clones of herself were nothing but bikini-wearing, yet thankfully glove-wearing, attacking from within, as they very unwelcomely swam around in it. Holy crap, these girls are going to quite literally give Kodo-sensei a heart attack, Nagisa loudly gasped and explained in shock, tightly covering his mouth with both of his hands as he did so, while Kodo-sensei rather annoyingly crossed his arms over his chest and surprisingly nonchalantly muttered, "The exact same thing could rather easily be said about you and Karma, you know," to himself in response. "Gee, ya think?" Karma threw his arms out beside himself and infuriatingly yelled at Nagisa, as Corona-chan's lesser copies of herself slowly began accelerating Kodo-sensei's heart rate considerably beyond what his actual heart rate was reasonably capable of, with his body being in the type of state that they and their master had been causing his body to be in, and also did so in a rather weirdly seductive manner, I might add. "Yeah, come on, baby, Beat it for me, darling. Many of Korona-chan's clones and Kota-sensei's heart began passionately moaning in rather disturbingly perfect union as they gently, intensely, erotically rubbed their practically naked bodies against the inner walls of said heart. Oh, my ever-loving God, I can literally feel how many incredibly hot Chinese girls are quite literally inside me right now, Kota-sensei's pink-faced and drooling moaned, becoming intensely aroused in the process while Nagisa and Karma merely cocked their eyebrows at said, quite literally heart-stimulating girls in utter confusion, and rather understandably went, ew. Yeah, taste the fat cholesterol, bitch. The rest of the Korona-chan clones, Korona-sensei's heart lovingly moaned, as they but surely began completely clogging said heart's arteries. Well, I must say, this teacher's heart sure does seem to be in far beyond savability, Karma sarcastically and weakingly told Nagisa, while Kora-sensei increasingly impatiently crossed his arms over his chest. So why not try engaging in a nice little comforting little heart-to-heart conversation with me, while you still have this hideously yet beautifully symbolic chance to do so? Karma seductively asked Nagisa, while said boy intensely smiling and blushing nodded his head. Oh, Karma, you're such a beautiful ray of sunshine in my rapidly darkening world. Even though I might not always show it, I love you intensely enough to quite easily make even God himself feel jealous. And that's a biblical fact, period. Nagisa began intentionally, corningly moaning and squeaking as he and Karma lovingly cuddled each other while the Korona-chan clones and Kota-sensei's heart confusingly and somewhat nauseatingly glared at the two of them in response. Nagisa, let me tell you how much I've learned to love you since I began to live. Even if the sun shone brightly and beautifully enough to make literally every last flower on this planet instantaneously spring into full blossom, the astonishingly high level of solar luminosity in question still would not even equal 1/1000th of the love that I feel for you at this micro instant. Blah! How freaking mushy can you two get? The Korona-chan clones and Kota-sensei's heart disgustingly groaned, very quickly and rather green-facedly flying back out of said heart in order to escape from Nagisa and Karma, before said boys' downright unbelievably sappy love for each other could cause them to quite literally vomit. Well, as long as those two didn't have heart-to-heart sex in my heart, I suppose that I can tolerate the quite frankly unbearable, overdramatic, and predictable things that they just have to say to the other. Kota-sensei rather impatiently, patiently stood behind his desk. Man, thank God for these new gas masks of ours. Nagisa and Karma increasingly revolted thought to themselves as they saw the sheer amount of blatantly rotten food, literally pure sugar, actual feces, and quite thoroughly used chewing gum that the Korona-chans and her fellow Korona-chans had clearly began smearing all over Kota-sensei's tongue. Alright boys, I've been waiting very patiently for the two of you to finally arrive here, but to be quite honest with you, your time was already up a long time ago. Ha 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 ha. Korona-chan downright diabolically laughed as she cellularly constructed a rather cartoonishly huge anti-Kota-sensei sledgehammer. Yowzers! Kota-sensei dramatically leaned backwards, tightly clutched his head with his hands and cryingly shrieked in pain. Alright, Kota-sensei, we're heading into your brain right now, so please be prepared. Also, just for the record, we really don't have time to clean your mouth right now, so please remember to extremely thoroughly brush your teeth and tongue once this mission is over. Well, go ahead and do what you have to do, but please be careful with the extremely fragile and sensitive inner workings of my auditory. Kota-sensei amazingly calmly began explaining to Nagisa and Karma as the two of them somewhat reluctantly entered his nauseatingly hairy and waxy right ear canal, then suddenly shrieked in downright unbearably intense pain as Korona-chan used her aforementioned anti-Kota-sensei sledgehammer to pound an absolutely massive hole through said octopus man's right eardrum. Well, here goes nothing. Karma shrugged his shoulders and rather worriedly chuckled to himself, causing Nagisa to quite nervously smiling nod in his head in agreement as the two of them jumped straight into the utterly nonsensical series of pneumonic tubes that Kota-sensei's right inner ear rather interestingly was and were therefore sucked straight through said pneumatic tubes series and into the said octopus man's freakishly large and powerful brain. "Cowabunga!" Karma incredibly awkwardly yelled as he and Nagisa finally got shot out of the exit end of Kota-sensei's right inner ear through a secret hatch that automatically closed itself almost immediately afterwards. Ugh. You want to know something, Karma? Kota-sensei really doesn't pay us enough for this crap, let me tell you. Nagisa nauseatingly groaned as he and Karma exhaustedly scrapped themselves off of the internal floor of Kota-sensei's rather weirdly hollow brain and got back up into their feet. He doesn't even pay us at all most of the time, you freaking dumb arse. Sometimes I honestly wonder how a freaking fat bastard is even able to afford the amount of stupid, worthless junk food that he eats. Karma threw his arms out beside himself and utterly infuriatingly began ranting at Nagisa after the two of them had finally finished dusting themselves off with their fans. Hey, I freaking heard that, mister. I'll have you know that I just earned yourself quite a bit of extra homework, young man, Kota-sensei rather angrily scolded Karma, causing said boy to immediately and extremely startlingly freeze and becoming totally silent as the octopus man's voice incredibly loud and intimidatingly echoed directly into said octopus man's brain through both of the ear canals that said octopus man's brain was connected to. Ha! Extra homework? Seriously? Let me tell you something, Mr. Smarty Pants. Extra homework is an absolute blessing when compared to what I've been planning for you, Kota-chan smirkingly and extremely mockingly informed Kota-sensei, using the rather surprisingly usable without logging in communication with brain owner's microphone that had incredibly conveniently located right in front of the clearly login screen displaying central nervous supercomputer in his frontal lobe, while an entire miniature army of Corona-chan's numerous clones of herself increasingly excitedly stood there. Oh, please. What sort of non-preventable by my extreme blatant plot armor why could you possibly hope to kill me? Go on, tell me, you utterly conceited drama queen. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't think that I heard you correctly with your words echoing around me so much in this comically oversized and utterly empty head of yours. Let me get it straight, pal. You're telling me that my entire personal army of equally anti-you fingernailed clones of myself somehow aren't going to be able to find a way to kill you from the freaking inside when you pretty much inevitably decide that you're too freaking high and mighty to properly comply with my orders? Is that right, Mr. Invisible? Yes, that's right, I suppose. Kota-sensei shook his head back and forth and listlessly sighed while Nagisa and Karma immensely disgustingly watched Corona-chan publicly eat her own freshly expelled fluids off her bare hands. Well, just so you know, allow me to properly tell you how utterly screwed you are now. Corona-chan licked her lips, slipped her high heels on. To give you more or less the exact number, I basically have 15 clones of myself accompanying me in this remarkably warm and cozy brain of yours as we speak to each other, due to some rather ironically named distress signal that I've sent to all of the other your body occupying clones of myself, using my psychic links to all of them. All 85 of them are also already making their way through your nostrils and ear canals, therefore into the aforementioned brain of yours as we speak to each other. I might as well literally be writing a book calling Killing You from the Inside 101, with you serving as the main subject matter of the images on the said book's front cover. Corona-chan incredibly long-windedly but rather admirably informatively explained to Kota-sensei, causing said octopus man to look as if he was about to have an actual heart attack from how utterly horrified he was becoming. An incredibly, downright horrifyingly short amount of time later. Alright, Kota-sensei, As we speak to each other, quite literally all of my exactly 100 clones of myself have already firmly, barehandedly, and razor-sharp anti-Kota-sensei fingernail havingly positioned themselves right next into the walls, ceilings of your precious little brain. Astonishingly spacious and technological advanced interior using their flight and teleportation abilities that I rather obviously also have. Nani? Kota-sensei tightly covered his utterly reeking mouth with his hands and loudly shrieked in absolute unbearable terror as Nagisa and Karma finally decided that they had officially enough of Korona-chan's absolutely insufferable arrogance. You know what? I've got a much better idea, since these minions of yours are apparently so mindlessly devoted to doing whatever you want to tell them to do. And you are such a downright insultingly blatant living caricature. Let's fight in order to determine whether or not Kota-sensei gets his brain horrifically ripped into bloody and gory shreds from the inside out by you and your aforementioned minions, shall we? Ha ha ha, let me tell you something, boy. You might be extremely good at stabbing people in their backs, but when it comes to actually fighting people head on, you don't even know the freaking half of how downright pitifully outmatched you and your utterly effeminate little butt buddy of yours both clearly are when compared to someone like me. Kota-chan maniacally laughed and increasingly hatefully sneered, before then proceeding to ludicrously, quickly, and forcefully grab Karma with not one but two of her rather eerily familiar-looking hair tentacles. Alright, Kota-sensei, here's the deal. While Korona-chan is busy not being able to figure out the fact that these suits of ours in fact appear to be virtually indestructible, would you mind telling me what your central nervous supercomputer password is, so that I can perhaps use said supercomputer to save your life if/when all else fails? Nagisa extremely quietly but extremely worriedly asked Korona-sensei, using said octopus man's aforementioned communication with brain owner's microphone, and amazingly enough, said octopus man told Nagisa the answer to said question. Come on, Corona, bitch. Is this seriously the best you can do? My freaking mother hits me harder than you do. Karma incredibly smugly teased Korona-chan with his injector knives, with her inexplicably effortlessly dodging every single one of said attempts to do so, while let's see how ironically confident you and Nagisa remain after being able to stop me from dying after I disable that nigh invulnerability feature of those precious little suits of you, shall we? Kota-sensei rather horrifyingly teased Karma and Nagisa out loud as he used his psychic links to the boys. Oh, we're freaking confident, alright, Karma and Nagisa increasingly angrily and amazingly valorously yelled, with quite a bit of Nagisa's anger ironically stemming from how utterly asinine of a brain password Kota-sensei had, as they suddenly joined together into an aerial behind Korona-chan and in front of Korona-chan formation, and then immediately began attacking Korona-chan from both sides with the injector knives, as they also suddenly decided to both be dual-wielding, with her somehow managing to effortlessly and very completely dodge quite literally every single one of their attacks yet again as they did so. Taste the true wrath of the ruler, you utterly pathetic little futuri brats, Korona-chan hatefully sneered at Karma and Nagisa as she ferociously and repeatedly slashed at both of said boys using her downright absurdly sharp fingernail claws. Boys, Class 3E sure does make a perfect meat substitute for undershorts, Kota-sensei utterly nonsensically rambled to himself as he recently cut/damaged neural wires thankfully began regenerating themselves back into their normal conditions. Hey Karma, what's a futuri? Nagisa rather curiously asked Karma while the two of them were busy dodging and blocking even more of Korona-chan's incredibly relentless attempts to chop them both into pieces with her finger claws. Basically, what this spoiled, rotten queen of all bitches happens to be, actually, Karma increasingly fiercely sneered at he and Nagisa made several more utterly futile attempts to stab Korona-chan with their injector knives, with quite literally every single one of said attempts being deftly countered by yet another one of Korona-chan's tentacle hair whips. Nagisa and Karma were somehow able to just barely dodge the first 6 of said or so attacks, but then Nagisa suddenly ran out of energy at the absolute worst possible moment and therefore got hit in the stomach. "I think I'll blow up the earth tomorrow." Kodo-sensei fish-eyedly and drooling rambled and laughed, clumsily and dizzily stumbled back and forth as he did so. Meanwhile, Nagisa exhaustedly, face-downly, and almost deadly collapsed onto the internal floor of said octopus man's poor brain. "Let's see how you like getting a taste of this medicine, shall we?" Korona-chan hatefully sneered as she used her tentacle of hers that she had just grabbed Karma with to downright mercilessly slam the boy against no less than 3 of Kodo-sensei's neural nodes. "Absolutely everything out of the ordinary isn't happening tonight. I, Thomas," Kodo-sensei very dizzily and very exhaustedly explained to Mr. Karasuma, using his Kodo-sensei sense phone, before then immediately hanging up on him. Needless to say, Mr. Karasuma had officially had far and more than enough of said octopus man's utter incompetence, and therefore ended up having a rather prematurely end of the midday pizza party that he had arranged for literally all of Class E's other students in the main building of the Kunijakaoka Junior High School campus, on which Kodo-sensei's old campus building was located. "Any last words before I kill both of you and your wimpy little boyfriend, and then order my personal army of clones to utterly rip and tear Kodo-sensei's brain into pitiful little shreds, sweetie?" Kono-chan finally returned her fingernails to their normal length, and sarcasm drippingly asked Karma after absolutely brutally throwing him straight down onto the internal floor of Kodo-sensei's temporal lobe, with not one, but 2 of her tear tentacles, and therefore causing said octopus man to quite nearly forget about the fact that Karma and Nagisa had ever even entered the inner workings of his body in the first place. Can I please show you how much I secretly love you first, honey?" Karma incredibly weakly crawled his way towards Korona-chan, who was rather impatiently sitting in a crisscross applesauce position and waiting for said boy on the internal floor of Kodo-sensei's occipital lobe on his hands and knees, and then utterly exhaustedly asked her, opening his suit heavily cracked visor and then rather foolishly removing said suit altogether as he did so. Disturbingly enough, Kono-chan actually said yes, despite Karma being a junior high school student. "Sure, big boy, why don't you start by licking my irresistibly pungent feet like the utter repulsive Japanese dog that you are, you little miserable little wannabe tough guy?" Kono-chan, after extending her legs directly towards Karma, very seductively crossed her left leg over her right, and surprisingly playfully teased Karma as she remarkably gracefully pulled her high heels right off her delightfully slender and devious hands to reveal quite possibly the most mouth-watering, gorgeous pair of soles that said boy had ever seen. Surely enough, she was incredibly foolishly facing directly towards the internal back wall of Kodo-sensei's brain as she did so. "Oh, you better freaking believe that I will, honey," Karma extremely arousedly moaned as he began thoroughly licking the delectably soft soles of Korona-chan's feet, while Nagisa incredibly weakly got back on his feet and zombie-esquely walked over to Korona-sensei's central nervous supercomputer so he can infuriatingly easily log himself into said computer to activate the security system. "Oh man, I don't even care if it makes me sick. This is just so freaking worth it," Karma overjoyingly moaned with increasingly genuine pleasure as he rather impressively effectively kept licking Korona-chan's feet, as Nagisa was already busy incredibly silently emptying the contents of his surprisingly numerous amount of ejector knives into the conveniently existent pesticide tank right next to Kodo-sensei's central nervous supercomputer. I sure do hope that you're ready for this. My adorable little foot slave, Kono-chan sadistically laughed as she extremely forcefully pressed the sole of her right foot against the increasingly erect member that had formerly been beneath the face-up lying Karma's pants and underwear, and then amazingly smoothly stroking said member several times using said foot. Oh, believe me, I'm ready, you utterly disgusting and hateful bitch, Nagisa seethingly muttered to himself as he impossibly silently clicked his way into the security system section of Kodo-sensei's control panel. Oh, that feels so good. Oh yeah. Karma was very close to orgasm from licking Kono-chan's feet. So close that it quite nearly caused him to utterly pass out from how downright unbelievably intense the orgasm that he was about to experience. Come on, big boy, pass out. Kono-chan very intently stared at the only barely still conscious Karma and increasingly anxiously began begging him, vigorously rubbing him through fluid-covered feet against each other so that they would become upgraded into even more thoroughly fluid-smeared feet. As she did so, while Nagisa suddenly activated the ludicrously enormous pesticide sprayer in the internal ceiling of Kodo-sensei's brain, just in time to thankfully prevent Kono-chan from actually being able to have any more of her utterly despicably selfish wishes granted. No. Oh dear God, please no, what is this? I'm dying. Oh, what a world. Who would have thought that this girly little boy like Nagisa could destroy my beautifully offensive, stereotypical Chinese-ness? I freaking knew that I should have watched where I was going. What an absolute fool I am. Kono-chan exhaustedly collapsed onto her hands and knees and began quite literally dying and crying and moaning while her literally 100 clones of herself immediately began falling straight down. Blue-haired boy, I sincerely promise, in the name of literally everything that my beautiful home country stands for, that you and your red-headed friend will pay for absolutely unacceptable insolence that the two of you just brazenly displayed in my throne room. Kono-chan unbelievably weakly growled at Nagisa, finally turning around to face Kodo-sensei's frontal lobe in the process, as Nagisa immediately grabbed a certain very recently dropped pair of Karma's injector knives off of the internal floor of said octopus man's temporal lobe. Ooh, Kodo-sensei very tightly clutched his increasingly intensely aching head, and his hands, in extremely dizzy, swayed back and forth as the bodies of Kono-chan's clones of herself surprisingly forcefully rained down onto the eternal floor of his brain, accidentally poking said floor with their fingernails. Watch where you're going, Ooh! Kono-chan incredibly scornfully and downright ridiculously hypocritically began yelling at Nagisa as said boy suddenly ran halfway around and therefore completely behind her, before then absolutely furiously driving both of his new injector knives straight into said absolute monster's back, while said back was still turned. Truly, the hardest choices require the strongest wills, Nagisa tiredly but triumphantly sighed as Kono-chan immensely satisfyingly crumbled into quite literal dust, while her clones of herself remained completely unconscious on the floor of Kodo-sensei's poor brain. Man, you sure can say that again, Karma immensely exhaustedly groaned as he finally got back up onto his feet, and then also finally resuited himself. Come on, partner. There's still one more thing that we need to do in order to finally get rid of Kodo-sensei's illness for good. One extremely thorough emptying of literal all of the medical contents later. Hasta la vista, bitches. Karma, whose suit pockets, just like Nagisa, now contain no less than 10 utterly empty injector knives, triumphantly double middle finger shootingly laughed. causing Nagisa to cross his arms over his chest and very agreeingly nod in his head response, as the exactly 100 Corona clones and Corona-chan had downright foolishly gathered every single one of together in Vore-O-Sensei's brain, were almost instantly vaporized by the suddenly quite massively intensified cloud of medicine gas. Alright, now we just need to tell Vore-O-Sensei about how great job we did. If you ask me, Karma, that sounds like a job for his CWBO microphone. Nagisa beyond relievedly laughed as he and Karma immediately ran straight back towards Vore-O-Sensei's central nervous system, supercomputer. Boys, you do know that I can already hear you two mucking about in my head anyways. Vore-O-Sensei pointed out one of his right index fingers straight up into the air, rather confusingly pointing it out. Vore-O-Sensei, I've got good news and bad news. Which of said news type would you prefer for me to start with? Nagisa somewhat nervously informed and asked Vore-O-Sensei. The good news, please and thank you. Vore-O-Sensei shrugged his shoulders and exhaustedly groaned as he incredibly persistently continued standing up. Well, luckily enough, me and Karma actually did, in fact, manage to utterly eradicate Corona-chan and all of her downright disturbingly exact clones of herself from her body. Nagisa somewhat reluctantly and nervously began explaining to Vore-O-Sensei. Full-body virus scan program in said Octopus Man's central nervous supercomputer to thoroughly make sure that he was indeed entirely correct about his statement. Phew! Vore-O-Sensei wiped the fear-induced sweat off of his forehead with one of his left arms and immensely relieved sighs. Oh, and also, I've rather thoroughly proven to be the brains to Karma's brawn yet again, just so you know, Nagisa rather arrogantly laughed. Hey, shut the freaking hell up, you little bitch, Karma downright fiercely yelled at Nagisa, shoving said boy out of his way with both of his arms in the process, and therefore causing yet another hilariously loud and random screaming cat effect to suddenly play as said boy was cartoonishly sent flying off of the screen. I'll have you know that I'm the real brains of this outfit, pal. Karmas rather forcefully grabbed Vore-O-Sensei's CWBO microphone and then incredibly petulantly yelled at said Octopus Man through it. To be honest, not really. In fact, I've been increasingly rapidly starting to realize that over the course of your recent weeks in Class 3E, you quite frankly have been talking awfully excessively advantage of my good nature, and have not been giving me and Nagisa the respect that we can really rather clearly deserve. Oh, and by the way, that's not even mentioning how ridiculously stupid you treat your other fellow classmates, as if they are. Vore-O-Sensei remarkably irritatedly crossed his arms across his chest and began rather sternly lecturing Karma, causing said boy to quite frustratedly and Vore-O-Sensei amusingly roll his eyes and mutter, "Here we go again." However, I digress. Before we can discuss said subject matter, I would very seriously like to know what the bad news about the otherwise basically perfect outcomes of this mission happens to be. Well, how exactly should I explain something that is this utterly deprived and humiliating, I wonder? Nagisa nearly indescribably disgustedly groaned. Go ahead, I'm listening. Vore-O-Sensei shrugged his shoulders, exhaustedly groaned, while Nagisa took a remarkably deep breath and then immediately began ranting his ever-loving head about the absolutely insane and downright word-defining recklessness. You see, Karma, in order to take Corona-chan's eyes off of me while I operated your brain's pest control system, he apparently decided that allowing said utterly sadistic and quite literally filthy whore to have what very clearly sounded like and also very clearly appeared to have been rather gratuitous foot sex with him, presumably complete with her bare feet making direct contact with his equally bare member, was a good idea. Do I really need to even explain how freaking worried I am about him right now? Nagisa utterly furiously ranted into Vore-O-Sensei's CWBO microphone. What can I say that hasn't already been said before about Karma's utter recklessness and the rather brazenly meaningful nature of his name? But But Kota-sensei, Korona-chan was... Karma threw his arms out besides himself and pathetically, desperately, and whiningly began explaining to Kota-sensei, wanting to finish said sentence with one of the sexiest bitches I've ever seen in my life, but thankfully being cut off mid-sentence by the octopus man's clearly purposeful, abrupt response to his words. Korona-chan, as it turns out, actually was an extremely real threat. Despite my numerous warnings, you and Nagisa stubbornly refused to actually realize how much of a threat she was until it was already basically too late. And now, irony of all ironies, you two are in one of dilly of a pickle as a result of said arrogance, Kota-sensei very mockingly and deliberately pretentiously explained to Karma and Nagisa. No, we're not, you freaking numbskull. We're in your... Nagisa and Karma, hilariously infuriated, began yelling into Kota-sensei's CWBO microphone in unison, only for said octopus man to abruptly cut them off. You're in my brain. Wow, what an incredibly difficult thing for someone who is as super intelligent as I am to be able to figure out without the two of you having to repeatedly tell me about it. Kota-sensei tightly clutched his chest with his arms and uproariously laughed at Nagisa and Karma's expenses, causing the two of them to become even angrier at their responses. God damn it, for fuck's sake, would you just fucking tell us how we're supposed to get out of your body? Karma unbelievably furiously screamed in Kota-sensei's CWBO microphone. Well, you see, it's a simple matter of the two of you needing to cause an air current that is powerful enough to expel the two of you from my body to pass through my nostrils, Kota-sensei still very trollishly explained to Nagisa and Karma, rather assumingly causing the two of them to look increasingly depressed and suicide-craving in response. That means I'm going to have to sneeze you out, you utterly adorable little rascals, Kota-sensei ever so playfully teased Nagisa and Karma as the two of them hitched a ride out. Just as we suspected, Nagisa and Karma immensely uncomfortably but still very fascinatedly thought to themselves, rather amusedly chuckling at how incredibly yellow Kota-sensei's comically huge, veiny throbbing head apparently also was on the inside, as they impressively quickly swam their way over to said octopus man's, quite literally right next to his eyebrows and nostrils, of which the left one was to the left of his left eye, while the right one was to the right of his right eye, with the water level inside his head rather luckily being just low enough to not actually be able to reach said nostrils, and therefore allowing Nagisa and Karma to climb directly into said nostrils. Alright, Karma, go ahead and enter Kota-sensei's right nostril. I'll enter his left one. Kota-sensei tilted his head backwards, tightly closed his eyes, and began loudly moaning from how much Nagisa and Karma were irritating the inside of his nose. Meanwhile, the said boys immediately stuffed their emergency feathers back into their suit pockets. Achoo! Kota-sensei's very loudly and astonishingly mighty sneeze, causing Nagisa and Karma to get mucus-coated, blown out of his nostrils at what must have felt like Mach 20 speed, and then immensely humiliating and stickily land on the octopus man's blackboard in not one but two nauseating gross splats. So tell me, boys, what exactly have you two learned from this remarkable, fantastic voyage of yours? Kota-sensei said. That we don't ever want to embark on such a journey again, Nagisa and Karma said in unison. Kota-sensei, I swear to fucking Christ and absolutely everyone that is related to him, if you don't fucking tell me what has been going on here, I'm going to give Nagisa and Karma legal fucking permission to kill you from the inside. Do you fucking hear me? Mr. Karuma said as he entered the building. Ground shakingly forcefully stomped his way over to Kota-sensei, before then very well deservedly grabbing him by the collar of his suit, using both of his rage-induced shaking hands and quite literally steamingly screaming at him. Oh, come on, what did I do? Kota-sensei threw his arms out besides himself, and bewilderedly whined. Massive jets of steam shot themselves out of the intensely red face, Mr. Kadosuma's ears. Well, let's see here, shall we? You presumably made me have to pay an extremely massive water pollution fine for certainly disgusting massive shit that you seem to have just recently taken in otherwise fresh water of the forest surrounding this building. You made me have to prematurely end one of your own students' extremely well-deserved parties just because you clearly have no godforsaken idea how to freaking behave yourself like an actual adult, or even many of your own aforementioned students. Oh, and if I'm not mistaken, you even deliberately put Karma and Nagisa's lives in ludicrously extreme danger just because you were sick. I've already temporarily fired Irina from her job as my unbearably incompetent and obnoxious female assistant. Don't freaking make me fire you from your current job. Well, at least coronavirus is no longer inside me, I suppose. Vore-O-Sensei shrugged his shoulders and lightly groaned, causing Mr. Kadasuma to utterly horrifically freeze in response. Oh dear God, which one of the students that you just set into yourself is it inside now? Seriously, you have to freaking tell me right now. Mr. Kadasuma very loudly and nearly microscopically pupidly gasped in surprise, then suddenly extremely clutched his head with both of his hands and began dementingly yelling in rather impressively unbridled terror, while Vore-O-Sensei rather frighteningly told him to please calm down in response. Oh, I don't know. Why don't you try asking the one who not only has bright red hair, but also has feverishly warm-looking skin? Vore-O-Sensei's sarcasm drippingly pointed out, while Mr. Kadasuma intensely aggravatingly rolled his eyes and rather understandably hatefully muttered, I don't get paid enough for this shit, to himself in response. Later, in the emergency room at the nearest hospital, so tell us, doctor, does this boy currently contain a supernatural, powerful COVID-19 germ that wants to horrifically pollute said boy's body and then make said boy's body its own in the style of an extremely stereotypical Chinese doctor? A face mask wearing Vore-O-Sensei very protectively stood right next to an also face mask wearing Nagisa and rather oddly specifically asked the generic doctor, who had been only barely professional, studying the hospital bed-bound and extremely sick-feeling Karma's symptoms. Of course, you freaking numbskull, Irina heartfully and extremely evilly laughed, causing her tits to jiggle like bowls of jelly as she did so, while Nagisa and Karasumi both very clearly wanted to die in response. Here we go again. Nagisa shrugged his shoulders and green-facedly, not to mention extremely depressedly and disappointingly groaned as the screen finally, at very long last, faded to black. The end.